The pen felt heavier than any debt I had ever carried. I stared at the signature line on the last page of the contract, the one waiting for the name Jamie Sorel. The paper was thick and creamy, smelling faintly of expensive linen and a whole lot of money. It was the only thing I had to focus on, because if I looked up, I'd have to look at Evander Thorne. He sat across the polished mahogany table, a man carved from ice and power. Everything about him, the razor-sharp cut of his suit, the way the chandelier's light barely thawed the cold blue of his eyes, the absolute stillness of his posture, screamed control. He was the kind of person who didn't just own the room, he owned the whole skyscraper we were in. Next to him sat Marcus. Marcus was the reason I was here. He was the sun to Evander's sterile, corporate moon. Where Evander was dark and sharp, Marcus was all easy laughter and golden light, with a smile that actually reached his eyes. He was the one who had read my application and seen a person, not a vessel. He was the one who had made this entire, dizzying arrangement feel like an act of kindness, not just a transaction. "You're hesitant, Jamie," Evander's voice cut through the silence. It was low and perfectly modulated, like the voice of a professional narrator delivering bad news. I finally lifted my gaze, meeting his, a mistake. His eyes were like glacial lakes, deep and unreadable. "No, Mr. Thorne," I said, keeping my own voice steady, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. "I'm just reading the fine print one last time." The fine print. That's where they'd put my life. Clause 4.1. The surrogate acknowledges his sole role is to carry the biological child of the intended parents to term. Clause 6.2. The surrogate waives all parental rights and shall not attempt to form a familial bond with the child. Clause 7.5. The surrogate agrees to adhere to all necessary security protocols and travel restrictions as deemed appropriate by the intended parent's security detail. It wasn't a contract, it was a cage, albeit a golden one. "It is a formality," Marcus interjected quickly, leaning forward, his warmth immediate and genuine. "A legal umbrella. We trust you, Jamie. We know you are doing this for the right reasons. For us." "For us." I looked at Marcus's hopeful face, then down at the staggering number written next to my required signatures, enough money to pay off the mortgage on my mother's failing bakery, enough to put my sister through college, enough to finally lift the weight of crippling debt that had crushed my family for years. It wasn't just for them. It was for me. It was for my family. It was a promise to escape poverty. I picked up the pen. The tip scratched against the paper, making the only sound in the tense silence. I scrawled my name, binding myself to the richest, coldest man I had ever met, and to a promise I knew would eventually break my heart. The document was pushed back to Evander. He barely glanced at my signature before initialing the page with a sharp, decisive flick of his wrist. It was over. I was officially their surrogate. "Congratulations, Jamie," Marcus whispered, reaching over the table to give my hand a quick, warm squeeze. "We're going to be a family." I managed a tight, nervous smile, but my stomach tightened, not just with nervousness, but with a sudden, sharp, inexplicable chill. It was the chill of Evander Thorne's silent, controlling presence, now officially cemented into the deepest part of my life. I was carrying their hope, their heir. I just didn't know yet that I was also stepping directly into their war. Chapter 1. The Crash and the Cost. The glittering chandeliers of the Thorne estate were gone, replaced by the yellow glow of the streetlights outside the hired car window. I was heading back to the quiet apartment they'd provided, a lavish, temporary bubble where I was meant to wait for the embryo transfer and then, the next 9 months of my life. Marcus had insisted on sending me with one of his own drivers, a sweet older woman named Clara, saying Evander's security was too aggressive. Even Marcus couldn't entirely mask the subtle tensions that thrummed beneath the surface of their marriage. Earlier, as I walked out of the estate's main doors, the tension had turned external. "Is that the surrogate?" A voice had barked, followed by the blinding flash of a camera. A gaunt, breathless reporter had lunged toward me. I froze, my hands instinctively going to my still flat stomach. "Not yet." I wasn't even pregnant yet, but the instinct was already there. Before I could process the humiliation or the fear, Evander had materialized. He moved like a shadow, swift and silent. He didn't speak to the reporter. He didn't even touch him. He simply stepped in front of me, a wall of bespoke wool and unyielding rage. "You are trespassing," Evander had stated, his voice now not just cold, but dangerous. "Any photo taken of my private affairs, any attempt to harass a guest of this estate, will result in the total destruction of your employer and your personal legal recourse. Leave." The sheer, terrifying confidence in his threat, and the fact that the reporter instantly scurried away, pale and muttering apologies, showed me the true weight of the Thorne name. I wasn't just a surrogate, I was his property for the next 9 months. His to control, his to protect, his to shield from the world he commanded. "Jamie, are you all right?" Marcus's hand was instantly on my elbow, warm and grounding. I had nodded, still shaken. "It's fine. I just didn't expect that." "That is the cost of my life, Jamie," Evander had replied, his gaze still fixed on the disappearing reporter. He hadn't looked at me, but his words were heavy with a warning, a dismissal, and perhaps a strange, possessive concern. "You will get used to it." Now, nestled in the back of the car, I closed my eyes, trying to recapture the feeling of normalcy. I thought of the embryo transfer scheduled for next week, the tiny seed of life I was agreeing to nurture. It felt like the one truly good, selfless thing I was doing. I was helping 2 men build the family they desperately wanted. My phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a text from my sister, Amora. Mom said she finally saw a new tenant for the old bakery storefront. "Maybe we don't have to sell. Love you." Hope, fragile but real, bloomed in my chest, a small, vibrant flower against the cold, dark landscape of the Thorne world. I smiled, feeling the pressure ease. I was doing the right thing. Everything was going to be all right. The car slowed as we pulled onto the quiet street of my new apartment complex. Clara parked, and the interior light flickered on. I grabbed my bag, thanking her warmly. Just as my hand reached for the door handle, the secure, internal line on the car's dashboard phone began to ring, a sharp, insistent, emergency sound I hadn't heard before. Clara frowned, her gentle face immediately etched with concern. "That's the estate line, dear. The one Mr. Evander uses for absolute necessity," she murmured, picking it up. "Clara speaking." Her face drained of all color as she listened. Her eyes widened, tracking something unseen and terrifying. Her grip on the phone tightened until her knuckles were white against the plastic. "No," she whispered, the sound a ragged gasp. "Oh, God, no. The bridge? It was just an accident." My heart stopped beating in my chest. The sudden, overwhelming silence in the car was louder than any gunshot. I watched her, frozen, unable to move, unable to speak. The hope that had just bloomed in my chest shriveled and died. She slowly lowered the phone, tears already streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. She turned to me, her eyes clouded with profound grief. "Jamie." "Marcus," she choked out, her voice broken. "Marcus is gone. A collision on the 101. He didn't make it." The world tilted. The contract, the money, the hope, it all vanished. Only one realization remained, burning through the shock. I was now pregnant with the heir of the coldest man alive, and the only person who had treated me with genuine kindness was dead. I looked down at the hand that had just signed my life away, the hand that had just been squeezed by Marcus. Now, that hand was all that was left to protect their child from the storm that was coming, a storm commanded by Evander Thorne, a widower now stripped of his only humanizing element. The storm had arrived. And I was trapped at its center. Chapter 2, The Widower's Vice. The word gone hung in the air, heavy and absolute, like the sound of a guillotine blade hitting wood. I didn't cry right away. Crying felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. My mind, usually frantic, went completely still, focused only on the look of pure devastation on Clara's face. Marcus, the easy laughter, the warm hand on my elbow, the promise of a truly kind future, all of it reduced to a collision on the 101. It can't be, I finally whispered, my voice sounding foreign and thin. I looked out the car window. The streetlights were too bright, the world too normal. How could the world be this normal when he was gone? Clara gripped my hand, her tears hot on my skin. They said, the truck didn't see him, Jamie. Just a terrible, terrible accident. But in the world of Evander Thorne, did accidents truly exist? Marcus wasn't driving a beat-up sedan, he was in an armored, state-of-the-art vehicle. The doubt, cold and ugly, settled immediately in the pit of my stomach. The next 72 hours passed in a surreal, suffocating blur. I stayed in the temporary apartment, completely alone. Evander didn't call. No one did. My phone was silent, except for a few frantic texts from Amora that I couldn't bring myself to answer. The world outside the glass walls of my gilded cage seemed to be swallowing itself whole. On the day of the funeral, I wasn't allowed to go. A cold, severe woman named Doreen, Evander's personal assistant, arrived precisely at 7 a.m. She stood in my living room, her face devoid of sympathy, and spoke with the measured cadence of a lawyer reading a will. Mr. Thorne has asked me to convey that your attendance at the service is inadvisable. The press is intrusive. Your contract demands the utmost discretion and minimization of stress. We cannot afford any complications. Cannot afford any complications. I wasn't a human being grieving, I was a complication waiting to happen. I tried to argue, my voice raw with indignation. I just want to pay my respects. Marcus was the only one. Marcus, Doreen cut in, her voice sharp as glass, was Mr. Thorne's husband. Mr. Thorne will handle the respects. Your job, Mr. Sorel, is to rest. To exist in stasis. To protect what is now solely his. The finality of that statement, the possessiveness, the immediate erasure of Marcus's role as a co-parent, chilled me to the bone. I stood defeated, watching the funeral on a small, muted television screen that Doreen had thoughtfully left running. The screen showed Evander Thorne. He stood beside the casket, a perfect monument to grief. His back was impossibly straight, his jaw clenched, his eyes shielded by dark, expensive glasses. He didn't shed a single tear. He didn't waver. He simply stood, radiating a terrifying, absolute control that seemed to defy the very laws of nature and grief. He wasn't a widower, he was a statue erected over a tomb. That night, everything changed again. I was startled awake at 1 a.m. by a noise, not a sudden crash, but the quiet, decisive sound of a key turning in the lock. 3 men in black suits walked into my living room. They were not smiling. They didn't introduce themselves. They simply held up a sleek, black tablet displaying a message in cold white text, immediate relocation required. Per clause 7.5. Security risk high. What's happening? I demanded, scrambling out of bed, my heart hammering against my ribs. I haven't even had the transfer yet. Where are you taking me? One of the men, built like a brick wall, finally spoke, his voice a flat monotone. You are being moved to the main estate, Mr. Sorel. Mr. Thorne's direct supervision. We have been instructed to ensure your safety is paramount. Safety. Right. Safety was just a code word for total surveillance. The move was brutal in its efficiency. They didn't pack my clothes, they simply inventoried them. They didn't ask me to walk, they escorted me with an unnerving proximity that felt less like protection and more like containment. 20 minutes later, I was standing in the very same Thorne estate I had left 3 days earlier, but this time, I wasn't a guest. I was an object, moved from the safe deposit box to the vault. My new room was vast, easily the size of my old apartment. It was technically a guest suite, but felt more like a beautifully furnished museum exhibit. The bed was draped in silk, the bathroom fixtures were gold, and the windows offered a panoramic view of the city that made me feel dizzyingly small and insignificant. But the beautiful view was sealed. I realized this when I tried to push open one of the French doors leading to a private balcony. It didn't budge. I ran my fingers along the frame and found no latch, no handle, just a smooth, seamless pane of bulletproof glass. I was locked in. I sank onto the edge of the silk bed, the luxurious fabric doing nothing to cushion the impact of my despair. I was now living under the roof of a powerful widower whose sole focus was control, and I was carrying the only piece of his dead husband he had left. My fate was now absolutely and irrevocably tied to Evander Thorne's grief, and I knew, with sickening certainty, that his grief would be far more destructive than his coldness ever was. My first encounter with Evander the widower happened the next morning. I was sitting by the unopenable window, trying to read a paperback, when Dorian appeared, silently carrying a silver tray. "Mr. Thorne requires your presence in the solarium. Now." The walk was torturous, a long, agonizing traverse through hallways filled with priceless art and oppressive silence. Every gilded frame, every polished marble floor, screamed of the enormous, dangerous wealth I was now trapped within. The solarium was a jarring contrast to the rest of the house, a massive glass room filled with vibrant, unruly green life. It was a space designed for Marcus. I remembered Marcus telling me about his dream of having a huge, warm space for his rare orchids. This was it. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and blooming jasmine. Evander was standing by a cluster of purple orchids, his back to me. He still wore a black suit, but this one was less formal, maybe wool, not silk, a concession to the humid room. "You're late," he said, not turning around. "I was brought here only minutes ago," I replied, trying to match his flat tone. He finally turned. His eyes were red-rimmed and hollow, no longer icy blue, but the dull, depthless gray of ash. The sight of his raw, contained pain was so sharp, so human, that it was almost more terrifying than his usual composure. "Let's dispense with the pleasantries," he said, his voice clipped and strained. "The contract has not changed, but the situation has. Marcus's wishes are paramount. And his wish was for this child to be an heir of the Thorne name, without complication." He walked past the orchids, stopping in front of a small, framed photo tucked behind a clay pot. It was a candid shot of Marcus, laughing, wearing a ridiculous straw hat. Evander looked at the photo, and for a split second, his control snapped. A muscle twitched violently in his jaw. He slammed his fist, not hard, but with crushing force, onto the cool stone pedestal beside the photo. The loud, dead thud echoed in the silent room. "You, Jamie," he said, turning back to me, his gaze now lethal. "You are the vessel for Marcus's only legacy. Your life is no longer your own. You will not leave this estate without my direct, written permission. You will not speak to any external party, including your family, unless the communication is monitored and approved by Dorian." I felt a surge of defiant, stupid anger. "You can't isolate me like that. I have rights. I'm still a person, not a prisoner." "You are a party to a multimillion-dollar contract, Mr. Sorel, carrying the last hope of the Thorne family name," he hissed, taking a step toward me. The scent of sandalwood and pure, undiluted alpha fury hit me like a physical wave. "Your rights ended when Marcus died. Now, you have an obligation." He paused, leaning in until his shadow fell over me. His voice dropped, becoming a low, dangerous growl. "If you try to breach the contract, if you cause one moment of undue stress, if you even think about leaving this estate, I will not only claw back the money I promised your family, I will personally ensure that your sister never sees the inside of a university and your mother's bakery is condemned tomorrow. Do you understand the severity of this?" I felt the blood drain from my face. My small, fragile hope, the bakery, Amora's tuition, had just been weaponized against me. I was completely, utterly powerless. "I understand," I choked out. He straightened, the rage receding, leaving only the cold, impenetrable ice. "Good. Now, you are to see the doctor in 1 hour. We will proceed with the transfer as planned. The heir will be conceived today." I watched him turn and walk away, disappearing back into the shadows of the mansion. I stayed in the solarium, hands shaking, heart pounding, trying to breathe in the damp, sweet air of Marcus's orchids. I walked over to the photo Evander had nearly shattered. As I reached to adjust the tilted frame, my fingers brushed against the back of the clay pot. It wasn't just clay. It was a cheap, plastic plant marker, the kind you use for garden herbs, but Marcus had used a Sharpie to write on the back of it. Not a plant name, but a single, cryptic instruction, scribbled in Marcus's unmistakable, friendly cursive. J. Clara. Camera. Safe. Don't trust the accident. My breath hitched. My entire body went cold, then hot. Don't trust the accident. Marcus had known. Before he died, he knew something wasn't right. He had left a message for me, the one person he must have believed would be safe, or maybe, the only person he believed would have a reason to look. I clutched the tiny piece of plastic in my palm, my panic instantly transforming into a cold, desperate resolve. I wasn't just a surrogate carrying an heir anymore. I was a witness, a custodian of a terrible secret, now trapped in the vault of the man who might be responsible for his own husband's death. The heir was to be conceived today. The war was officially beginning. And I had the first piece of evidence. Clapperboard Chapter 3, The Seed of a Secret. The doctor's office was only an idea here. Evander Thorne didn't go to doctors, he had them delivered. The procedure room was a sterile white box within the mansion's massive medical wing, all stainless steel and hushed competence. The embryologist, a woman with kind but tired eyes, introduced herself quietly. She worked with the quiet efficiency of a technician handling priceless goods, which, in a way, she was. I lay on the crisp, paper-covered table, shivering slightly, even though the room was warm. My heart hammered not with the nervousness of a hopeful parent, but with the cold dread of a hostage. I felt like I was submitting to a political procedure, not a biological one. The embryo itself was tiny, a microscopic speck of hope that belonged to a dead man. I looked at the screen, at the perfect, glowing little cluster of cells, and whispered a silent apology to Marcus. I'll protect them both. I promise. We are ready, Mr. Sorel, the embryologist said gently. Just as she was about to begin, the door clicked open. Evander Thorne stood framed in the doorway, still in his morning black, a stark shadow against the white walls. He didn't ask if he could enter. He didn't offer comfort. He simply walked in and stood by the foot of the table, his arms crossed over his chest, his gaze fixed not on me, but on the screen displaying his future heir. His presence was like a sudden drop in temperature. The air grew thick and heavy. Mr. Thorne, with all due respect, your presence might increase the surrogate's stress levels, the doctor began, her voice tentative. I am aware of the risks, doctor. Evander cut her off, his eyes never leaving the monitor. I need to witness the conception. Marcus wanted this. It was the first time I'd heard him invoke Marcus's name since the funeral, and the sound of it, cold, possessive, manipulative, made my stomach clench tighter than any physical pain could have. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to block him out. I focused on the tiny, fragile seed of life and the damp, earth-scented note folded and pressed into my palm. J. Clara. Camera. Safe. Don't trust the accident. This wasn't about him. It was about Marcus. It was about justice. It was about the child. I am not just a vessel, I thought fiercely. I am the key. The procedure was quick, sterile, and clinical. A small, almost imperceptible warmth spread in my lower abdomen, and then it was over. The doctor smiled, a flicker of genuine hope in her eyes. It's done, Mr. Sorel. Congratulations. Now, you must remain perfectly still for the next few hours. Absolute bed rest. Evander didn't say thank you. He didn't even acknowledge the doctor. He simply lowered his gaze to me, his hollow, grey eyes finally meeting mine. There was no joy, no gratitude, only a terrifying, deep-seated possessiveness. You are now carrying my child, Jamie, he said, his voice a low, gravelly reminder of my absolute loss of control. Do not fail me. The threat was implicit in every syllable. I nodded, unable to speak, and watched him turn and leave, the cold shadow instantly retreating. He had what he wanted. His heir was conceived. And I was officially his prisoner, tied to his legacy by the invisible thread of a microscopic, perfectly controlled life. The silent investigation. The next 3 days were agonizing. I was confined to the vast, silken bed, allowed only short, monitored walks to the bathroom. Dorian was my warden, bringing me trays of perfectly portioned food, never saying more than was absolutely necessary. My phone remained shut down, secured in a locked drawer. I used the quiet confinement to memorize the cryptic message, J. Clara. Camera. Safe. Don't trust the accident. The clues were a timeline, or perhaps a chain reaction. I knew I needed to contact Clara first. She was the most reliable link, the only one who had shown me genuine emotion after the crash. My chance came on the 4th day. Dorian needed to leave the estate for a critical document signing. She assigned my care to a new staff member, not security, but a domestic aide. Selim. He was young, quiet, with deep-set, intelligent eyes, and wore the anonymous, charcoal-grey uniform of the estate staff. He didn't talk much, but when he did, his voice was low and oddly gentle. He moved through the suite like a ghost, efficient but unobtrusive. He was my best, and possibly my only, shot. I waited until Selim was cleaning a far corner of the living area, his back to the door, humming a faint, melancholic tune. I stood up, pretending to stretch, and walked to the bedside table where Dorian had left the room's internal phone, only for staff communication, but still a link. Selim, I called, trying to keep my voice light. Could you bring me a glass of water from the kitchen? Not chilled, please. I'm starting to feel a little queasy. He turned, his expression unreadable. Right away, Mr. Sorel. As soon as he left the room, I moved. I grabbed a pen and a napkin from the tray table and scrawled 3 desperate words. Need Clara now. Urgent. I folded the napkin tightly. The internal phone was useless for outside calls, but I knew the estate's car service used a separate, secure tablet for logistics. They wouldn't let me out, but maybe I could get a message out. When Selim returned, I was back on the bed, feigning exhaustion. He placed the water on the table, his movements precise. As he bent slightly to adjust the blanket, I reached out and quickly, furtively, slipped the folded napkin into the side pocket of his uniform jacket. I didn't look at his face. I didn't dare. I just watched his hand pause near the pocket for a fraction of a second, too long to be accidental, before smoothly pulling the blanket up to my waist. He walked to the door. Just before he opened it, he paused and looked back at me. His eyes, usually guarded, held a deep, troubled flicker, the first raw emotion I'd seen from any staff member besides Clara. Mr. Sorel, he said softly, the gardener says the orchids in the solarium need to be moved to a cooler room soon. They're getting too much direct heat. It was a completely random comment about the one room in the mansion associated with Marcus. It was a signal. He had seen the note. And he was warning me. I swallowed, my heart doing a painful double flip in my chest. Tell the gardener. I think that's an excellent idea, Selim. Please. He gave a slight, nearly imperceptible nod and was gone. Now, I had to wait. If Selim had thrown the note away, I was back to zero. If he was reporting to Evander, I was done for. But if he was helping, I focused on the next clue, camera. Marcus had often talked about his old, beautiful photography equipment. He was an avid amateur photographer. He would develop his prints in an old, unused space in the east wing of the mansion, far from Evander's corporate offices. I waited until nightfall. The house, usually silent, had a heavy, suffocating stillness. My anxiety was a tight coil in my chest. I knew I had to risk it. Evander would be in his office until 3 a.m., as always. My heart pounding, I managed to disable the simple magnetic lock on my door using a hairpin I'd found. It was a small, rebellious victory. I slipped out into the dark hallway, moving like a shadow. I followed the floor plan I'd memorized from an old architectural magazine I'd found in my suite, past the grand staircase, through a gallery of cold, marble busts, toward the seldom-used east wing. The wings smelled different, less like expensive cleaning products and more like dust and aged paper. I found the door Marcus had described, plain, heavy oak, tucked behind a tapestry. I tried the handle. Locked. Suddenly, a sound. The unmistakable, rhythmic tap-tap-tap of expensive leather shoes on marble, coming from the main hall. Someone was approaching. It couldn't be Evander, he was too fast. Door in? I flattened myself against the wall, behind the tapestry. The footsteps stopped directly in front of the door. A hand reached out and, instead of trying the knob, ran a slender finger along the paneling, searching for something. Then, a soft click, the sound of a hidden digital keypad being activated. My breath hitched. It wasn't Evander. The scent that washed over me was rich, complex, and overwhelmingly alpha, but it wasn't the sandalwood of Evander's rage. It was spiced cedar, mingled with something darker, sharper, a scent that carried its own specific, dangerous authority. The door swung inward, revealing the silhouette of a man. He was tall, powerfully built, and carried himself with the lethal grace of a predator. He stepped inside the dark room, pulling the door shut behind him. I waited, adrenaline flooding my system. Who was this? Another one of Evander's guards? A family member? A second later, the lock clicked again. I heard the man move across the floor, then the sudden, harsh click of a desk lamp being switched on inside the room. Before I could process anything, a voice, deep, resonant, and utterly foreign, broke the silence of the East Wing. Evander's not the only one looking for the truth, Jamie Sorel. And you just walked right into my net. My heart seized. The voice, the tone, the fact that he knew my name, it was a trap. I backed away from the tapestry, ready to run, but my hips struck a small, decorative table, sending a heavy, gilded vase tumbling to the floor. Crash! The man inside the room moved with shocking speed. The door flew open, and I was instantly blinded by the glare of the lamp. I saw his face for a split second, a handsome, fierce countenance framed by dark hair, his blue eyes sharp with surprise and something else, recognition. He grabbed my arm with an iron grip that instantly subdued me. "What the hell are you doing out of your room?" he demanded, pulling me into the light. "And who are you?" "Let go of me," I gasped, struggling uselessly against his strength. Just as the man was about to speak again, another sound, closer this time, faster, and much more familiar. What was that noise? "Security, report." Evander's voice, sharp and furious, was echoing down the main corridor, heading straight for us. The man holding me swore under his breath, his eyes wide, a flicker of genuine panic crossing his face. He didn't let go. Instead, he yanked me toward the inner room, shoving me behind a heavy velvet curtain just as Evander rounded the corner. The stranger stood blocking the entrance to the room, his whole demeanor shifting instantly from aggressor to ally. He was shielding me, but why? Evander arrived, his black suit immaculate, his gaze searing. He stopped dead, recognizing the man instantly. "Caius," Evander spat out the name, the sound laced with absolute, undisguised hatred. "What the hell are you doing in the East Wing?" My captor, Caius, leaned against the doorframe, radiating cold confidence, but his hand, the one that had just been clamped around my bicep, was now subtly pressed against the curtain, reminding me that I was trapped. "Relax, Evander," Caius said, his voice smooth and deceptively calm. "I'm here about the merger. I wanted to see where Marcus kept his old files. You know how meticulous he was." The lie was flimsy, but it bought me time. I held my breath, the beating of my heart a terrifying drum against the silence of the East Wing. I was caught between the man who controlled my life and a complete stranger who had just called him by a name that spoke of deadly rivalry. Chapter 4: The Brothers' Betrayal. The second the door flew open, The air pressure in the hallway seemed to equalize the raw, unmasked hatred that erupted between the two men. I was pressed against the rough velvet of the curtain, smelling the scent of cedar and danger from the man who was holding me captive, while listening to the icy fury from the man who held my life in his hands. Caius, Evander repeated the name, dragging it out like a curse. His voice was dangerously soft. I asked you what you are doing in a restricted wing of my home. My captor, Caius, Evander's rival, perhaps his brother, judging by the shared, arrogant posture and the similar chill in their blue eyes, didn't flinch. I told you, Evander. Marcus was more than just your husband to the firm, he was my partner on the Sierra merger. I'm looking for the early risk assessments he kept here. They're nowhere on the shared network. Don't tell me you've already started clearing out his private work. Caius's eyes narrowed, adding a layer of professional grievance to the raw aggression. It would be a new low, even for you, hoarding documents just to screw me out of commission. And what was that noise? Did your security break something? Evander's gaze didn't leave Caius's face, but I felt it, like a laser beam cutting through the velvet curtain. He was calculating, assessing the risk of calling Caius's bluff versus the risk of exposing me. The noise was a staff mishap. The wing is locked down, Evander stated, stepping closer, his voice low. If you require files, you will go through Dorian. If you trespass again, I will have your corporate access revoked, brother or not. Brother. I closed my eyes briefly. Marcus was caught between them even in death. Always the controlling one, Caius scoffed, leaning further into the doorway, ensuring he remained a shield. Fine. Get the documents to my office by morning, or I'll assume you're trying to sink the deal, too. Evander held his stare for another tense, agonizing second, then turned and walked away. The tap-tap-tap of his shoes receded, leaving behind a silence far heavier than before. Caius didn't move until the sound was completely gone. Only then did he throw the door shut and spin back toward the curtain, yanking it aside. I stumbled out into the glare of the desk lamp, my eyes wide with terror. Who the hell are you? I gasped, clutching my stomach instinctively. Caius didn't answer. He was too busy assessing me, the swollen eyes, the silk pajamas, the obvious vulnerability. Jamie Sorel, he murmured, his voice losing its corporate hardness, replaced by a guarded curiosity. The surrogate. They told me you were completely under lock and key. What are you doing sneaking around Marcus's darkroom? I could ask you the same thing. I retorted, finding a spark of fight. You're in a restricted wing. You broke in. And what were you searching for? The merger files? Or something else? He looked me up and down, a reluctant admiration flickering in his eyes. He was dangerously handsome, less austere than Evander, more volatile, with a constant edge of barely contained energy. I'll make you a deal, surrogate. Caius said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial level. You have information. I'm looking for answers about the accident. Marcus was my twin brother, and Evander is a monster with a perfect facade. That crash wasn't random, and I know Evander's been covering something up. I stared at him, my breath catching. Marcus's twin. The rivalry was a mask, hiding profound grief and suspicion. He threatened my family, I whispered, my defense instantly crumbling. He knows about my mother's bakery, my sister. He said if I even thought about leaving, he'd ruin them. Caius's jaw tightened. That sounds like Evander. His love is a leash, and his protection is always a cage. I took a shaky step closer. Marcus left me a message. A hidden note in the solarium. It said, J. Clara. Camera. Safe. Don't trust the accident. Caius's composure shattered. He gripped the edge of the heavy desk, his eyes blazing with certainty. The camera. Marcus kept an encrypted hard drive here, hidden inside his old enlarger. He would never put the Sierra merger files on it. He only put things he wanted completely hidden from Evander. He was working on something big. He moved quickly, efficiently scanning the small room. He found the old, heavy photography enlarger, a piece of vintage equipment, and worked a series of hidden mechanisms. With a subtle metallic click, the base popped open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside, nested in the foam, was a sleek, military-grade encrypted hard drive. Caius snatched it, his hand trembling slightly. This is it. This is what Evander is trying to keep buried. But I can't open it here. He'll know the minute I try to connect to the Thorne network. Then you have to go, I urged, the memory of Evander's footsteps still echoing in my mind. Take it. Find the truth for Marcus. Find it for the baby. Caius paused, his gaze fixed on my face. He was making a choice, trust the scared, pregnant surrogate, or trust the cold data. He chose me. I can't just leave you here, Jamie. Not now. Evander will know the drive is missing, and he'll know you were the one to expose it. You are the only person who had access to that note. But I can't leave. I have the transfer. I have to stay still, I insisted, rubbing the slight swelling in my abdomen. Caius ran a frustrated hand through his dark hair. No. Your security just became 0. I'm taking you to a safe house. We need a neutral third party, someone loyal to Marcus who Evander can't touch. Clara. The first name on the note. The driver. Clara. Marcus used her for sensitive deliveries. If anyone can get you out without raising an alarm, it's her. He pressed the hard drive into my hand. Keep this hidden. I'm going to create a diversion in the main wing. When I do, you go straight to the kitchens, take the service exit, and keep running until you find Clara's cottage, the address Marcus used for his private gardening supplies. It's on the old map in the mudroom. He didn't wait for my agreement. He turned, his alpha energy focused and lethal. He pressed the heavy velvet curtain back against the wall, covering the small niche where I had been hiding. I'll buy you 10 minutes, Jamie, he said, his voice quiet but absolute. You have one chance to save yourself and the baby. Go. He disappeared back into the darkness of the east wing. A second later, I heard the faint, distant sound of a door being smashed open, Evander's study, perhaps? Followed by the sudden, piercing blast of the mansion's general security alarm. The alarm. A terrifying, blaring siren that plunged the hallway into chaos. I pressed the cool metal of the hard drive against my palm, a heavy burden that represented life, death, and betrayal. I was pregnant, trapped in a billionaire's mansion, and running for my life with the evidence that could destroy my captor. I took off running down the dark, carpeted hallway, heading not for the kitchens, but for the solarium. I had to check the mudroom for the map, but first, I needed to know if Selim had delivered my message. I was about to be hunted by Evander Thorne, and I had to know if I had an ally waiting outside the gates. I burst into the fragrant, humid heat of the solarium. The chaos outside didn't exist in this green, tranquil space. I ran straight for the orchids Marcus loved and found a small, neatly folded piece of white linen tucked into the clay pot. I snatched it up, my hands shaking so hard I could barely unfold the fabric. Scribbled in neat, clear handwriting, Clara is waiting at the South Gate Service Road. She knows you are coming. Go. It was Selim. He had delivered the message. I shoved the hard drive deep into the pocket of my silk pants, clutching the linen note. The security alarm wailed, and I heard the quick, heavy thud of security boots approaching the east wing. Evander's voice, sharp and commanding, barked orders in the distance. I turned toward the service corridor, feeling the first, small, but powerful surge of protective instinct for the tiny life inside me. I wasn't running just for Jamie Sorel anymore. I was running for Marcus's baby, and I was running with the secret that could finally expose the Ice Alpha. My 10 minutes were up. Chapter 5. The South Gate Service Road. The wail of the security alarm was a terrifying, physical thing, vibrating through the marble floor and up into my bones. It was the sound of my life shattering. I ran down the service corridor, the heavy velvet curtain I'd hid behind swinging wildly in my wake. My silk pajamas were useless, slippery, conspicuous, and offering no warmth against the sudden, air-conditioned chill of the seldom-used hallways. I clutched the hard drive in one hand and the linen note in the other, the cool metal and the soft fabric grounding me in the reality of my desperate flight. I could hear the security team now. Not just the thudding boots, but the sharp, echoing calls down the corridor. East wing breach. Lockdown initiated. Find the target. The target. That was me. And the tiny life I carried. I burst through the door leading to the main kitchen. The entire staff, a flurry of chefs and cleaners, had stopped working, their faces a mixture of confusion and fear, all looking toward the noise. I didn't stop. I ran straight for the exterior service exit, shoving through a set of double doors that led to the delivery dock. The cold night air hit me with a shock. I was outside, under the vast, uncaring sky, surrounded by the towering, impenetrable hedge that encircled the Thorne estate. I looked around frantically. Where was the mudroom map Caius had mentioned? I couldn't run blindly into the darkness. Then I saw it, an old, dusty wooden box tucked next to a stack of empty crates, the kind of box meant for storing gardening gloves and cheap tools. It had a rough, hand-drawn map tacked to the inside lid. It must have been Marcus's. I snatched the map. It was simple, showing the mansion's perimeter and the various access points. My finger found the destination instantly, thanks to Marcus's meticulous handwriting: Clara's Cottage, South Gate Service Road. I didn't hesitate. I vaulted over the low railing of the dock and dropped into the thick grass, tearing the thin silk of my pants. I ran along the inside of the perimeter hedge, using its shadow for cover. The service road was a thin, gravel track that ran parallel to the main road, designed for discreet deliveries. I could see the gate now, a simple, electronic barrier, not the imposing main entrance. A dark sedan was idling there, its engine a low, comforting hum against the siren's shriek. The driver's door opened, and Clara stepped out. She was wearing a thick coat, her face hidden in shadow, but the way she held herself, rigid, watchful, confirmed she was my ally. "Jamie! Get in!" she hissed, her voice a rush of desperate relief. I sprinted toward her, the gravel crunching loudly under my bare feet. I was 10 feet away, 5 feet away, safety was within reach. Suddenly, a voice, cold and lethal, sliced through the night. "Stop! Do not move, Jamie." I froze. My adrenaline-spiked heart stumbled. Evander. He was standing on the delivery dock I had just left, a horrifying silhouette of rage and power against the mansion's lights. He must have bypassed the guards and come after me himself. He wasn't holding a weapon, but the sheer force of his presence was more paralyzing than any gun. "You have 5 seconds to return to the house and hand over what you stole, or I will use every resource I have to ensure you regret the moment you ever met my family," he roared. I saw the first 2 security guards burst onto the dock behind him. "Go, Jamie, Gio!" Clara screamed, throwing open the passenger door. I broke free of the paralysis and lunged into the car. Clara slammed the door shut and stomped on the accelerator. The car peeled out onto the service road just as Evander's voice reached a terrifying crescendo of command. "Dorian! Contact local PED, report the vehicle stolen and the passenger, a dangerous, unstable threat to the estate's security." The accusation was brilliant, cutting me off from the world, turning me into a fugitive, a madman who had tried to steal from the grieving billionaire. We sped away, the massive hedges blurring into a solid green wall. The security siren faded, replaced by the low, urgent thrum of the sedan's engine. I finally managed to breathe, leaning my head back against the headrest, clutching the hard drive until my fingers ached. "Thank you, Clara," I gasped, tears finally blurring my vision. "Thank you." Clara didn't look at me. Her eyes were fixed on the rearview mirror, tracking the road behind us. Her knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "Don't thank me yet, dear," she muttered, her voice tight with terror. "Evander's probably already alerted the police. We need to lose this car." She drove with a focused intensity one hadn't seen in the kind, grandmotherly woman who usually drove me. She expertly navigated a series of dark, winding backroads, shaking off any tail. After 10 minutes of breathless silence, she pulled into a poorly lit, abandoned warehouse complex. She cut the engine and threw open the glove compartment, revealing a second, older phone. "Marcus planned for this," she whispered, grabbing the phone. "He knew. He always knew Evander's enemies were ruthless, but he never suspected. He never suspected his own husband." I stared at her, the pieces clicking into place. The coded note, the hidden drive, the way Evander never cried. "Did Marcus tell you about the accident?" I asked, my voice barely a tremor. Clara shook her head, her expression grim. "He didn't tell me, Jamie. He showed me. A few weeks ago, he asked me to install a separate, unlisted camera in the car, linked only to a hard drive, said he was doing an internal security review. When I saw the news, I pulled the SD card from that camera before the wreckage was towed." My heart hammered. Camera. The second clue. What was on it, Clara? She looked at me, her eyes filled with profound sorrow and fear. "Not the crash, Jamie. The moments before the crash. Marcus was stopped at a light. His security detail was supposed to be in front, but they pulled away suddenly. Then, Dorian, Mr. Thorne's assistant, pulled up in a separate vehicle. She didn't speak. She just made a quick hand gesture to the truck driver waiting next to them, then drove off." I gasped, covering my mouth with a trembling hand. Dorian. The cold, emotionless warden. The only one whose access Evander trusted completely. Evander's assistant ordered the hit, I whispered, the words tasting like ash. "She facilitated it," Clara corrected, tears finally escaping her eyes. "She cleared the security car and signaled the truck. Evander didn't get his hands dirty, but he orchestrated it. Marcus was investigating something huge, something involving the Sierra merger and possibly money laundering. He was going to turn Evander in." The hard drive in my pocket suddenly felt scorching hot. It wasn't just evidence of a merger plot, it was the motive for murder. Clara grabbed the second phone, her resolve steeling. "We need to connect with Caius. Marcus told me if anything ever happened, Caius would be the only one strong enough to fight Evander, but he's too impulsive. He needs the truth, not just a hunch." She rapidly punched in a number. It rang once, then a familiar, deep voice answered. "Clara, I bought you 30 minutes, but Evander's put out a corporate-wide APB on the car. Where is Jamie? I need the drive." Caius's voice was strained, laced with urgent danger. Clara put the phone on speaker, her voice low and steady. "We are safe, Caius. But it's worse than you thought. It wasn't just a corporate hit. Evander used Dorian to set up the crash. We have the evidence, Marcus's camera footage and the drive. But we can't hold them. Evander will find us. We need a protected drop point." Silence stretched across the phone line, heavy with the weight of Marcus's betrayal. When Caius finally spoke, his voice was different, no longer the aggressive alpha, but a man driven by cold, righteous fury. "I know where to go. The safe. Marcus had a lawyer, Lucien, who owes me a favor. He has a bunker, a private place that isn't on the grid. Drive to the old, decommissioned refinery outside the city limits. I'll meet you there with Lucien. Don't trust anyone until you see me." "Refinery." "Understood," Clara confirmed, hanging up the phone. She looked at me, her gaze steady. "We're not going to a safe house, Jamie. We're going to a bunker. We are officially going to war with Evander Thorne." I reached down, running my hand over my stomach, over the tiny, innocent life now nestled inside me. My heart was no longer racing from fear, but from a fierce, protective certainty. I was pregnant with the heir of a murdered man, and I had the proof. I was no longer a pawn. I was the key to Evander Thorne's downfall. Clara started the car, but pulled out the keys almost immediately, holding them out to me. "I'm old, Jamie, and Evander's car has a tracker. He'll find me first. Take the keys. Take my truck in the back. It's unmarked, old, and reliable. You drive. I'll keep this sedan here as a decoy for as long as I can. My eyes widened in horror. No. I can't leave you. He'll hurt you. Clara placed a hand on my cheek, her touch gentle but firm. I am just a driver. He will yell, Jamie, but he won't risk his image on a staff member. He will only hurt you and his child. You have the drive. You have the promise. You are the one who has to survive this. She shoved the keys into my hand. Go. Find the white Ford pickup in the back lot. Drive and don't look back. I scrambled out of the car, looking back only once. Clara was already settling into the driver's seat of the sedan, pulling her thick coat tighter, ready to face the storm for me. I ran toward the rear of the warehouse complex, toward the dull gleam of an old white truck, clutching the hard drive, the hard truth, in my hand. I was running alone now, pregnant, exposed, and hunted by the most powerful man in the city. And I was driving straight into a clandestine meeting with his fierce, grief-stricken brother. Chapter 6: The Refinery and the Final Betrayal. The white Ford pickup was ancient, smelling faintly of old gasoline and damp earth, a perfect, anonymous disguise against Evander's high-tech pursuit. I drove, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white, while the wind roared past the open window. I focused on the road, on the promise I'd made to the tiny life inside me, and on the terrifyingly urgent reality of the hard drive pressed into my thigh. I was no longer Jamie Sorel, the poor surrogate. I was a fugitive carrying the only weapon against a grieving murderer. The drive to the decommissioned refinery outside the city was a blur of flashing lights and near misses. Every police cruiser, every dark SUV that passed, felt like Evander's net tightening. I knew Clara's sacrifice had bought me time, but that time was running out. Finally, the landscape changed. The manicured lawns and bright highway lights gave way to rust-colored pipes and chain-link fences. The refinery was enormous, a skeleton of industry abandoned decades ago, its shadow cast long and menacingly by the few flickering security lights. I pulled the Ford up to a single, unmanned gate at the far side of the complex and cut the engine. The silence was absolute, broken only by the distant clanking of metal in the wind. I was alone, exposed, and exactly where Caius said I needed to be. My heart hammered against my ribs, a painful, frantic beat. I waited, scanning the darkness for movement. Nothing. Had Caius been caught? Was this a trap set by Evander? Suddenly, a faint, rhythmic tap-tap-tap echoed from inside the nearest building, a signal. It was the same sound I'd heard Caius make just before he accessed Marcus's darkroom. I scrambled out of the truck, the cold gravel biting into my bare feet, and ran toward the sound, clutching the hard drive in my hand. I found Caius waiting for me inside a massive, open bay, illuminated only by a single, powerful floodlight hanging from a rusting crane. He wasn't alone. Standing next to him was a distinguished, older man in a charcoal suit, Lucien, the lawyer. Lucien's face was etched with worry, but his posture was that of a man used to handling dangerous secrets. Caius rushed toward me, his face etched with a fear he hadn't allowed himself to show when facing Evander. Jamie! Thank God. Are you hurt? Did he touch you? He grabbed my shoulders, his gaze sweeping over me with a protective intensity that felt overwhelming. I'm fine, I whispered, shoving the hard drive into his hand. He sent the police. He lied. He called me unstable. Caius's eyes darkened with cold fury as he looked at the drive. That's his standard move. Create a villain so no one looks at the hero. Lucien, get the connection ready. We don't have time. Lucien nodded, already kneeling next to a small, silver suitcase. This bunker is off the grid, Caius, but the moment you try to access the Thorne drive, his IT team will get a ping. We have one shot to download the key files. Caius turned his full attention back to me. His expression was fierce, possessive, and yet, surprisingly gentle. I need you to tell me everything you know, Jamie. We're doing this for Marcus. And for his child. I told them about the contract, the sterile isolation, Evander's terrifying threat to my family, and finally, the two pieces of evidence, Clara's camera footage and Marcus's coded note. As I spoke, Caius grew visibly colder, his handsome features hardening into an identical mask of ruthlessness that I'd seen on Evander, but this time, it was aimed outward, at his brother. Lucien connected the hard drive to a heavily encrypted laptop. The screen flashed green, demanding a password. Marcus would never use anything obvious, Caius murmured, pacing frantically. Not a date, not a name. I looked at the drive, remembering the note. J. Clara. Camera. Safe. Don't trust the accident. Wait, I said, my voice sharp. The last clue. Safe. It's not a place, it's the password. Marcus was obsessed with his first orchid, a rare hybrid called the Safe Haven. Caius looked at me, his eyes wide, and slammed his fingers onto the keyboard. Safe Haven. Enter. The drive unlocked. The screen flooded with folders, not the corporate files Caius expected, but personal, encrypted data, Dorian com logs, insurance payout analysis, Sierra merger red flags. Caius clicked on the first log. A timeline of encrypted chats between Evander and Dorian, leading up to the crash. As the logs scrolled, Caius read them out loud, his voice cracking with heartbroken disbelief. Must be handled before the board meeting, his getting too close to the shell company, use the clearance for the 101D2, make it look like an opportunistic hit, make sure his security detail is pulled. Evander had murdered his own husband to cover up an illegal corporate plot. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The coldness I had witnessed wasn't grief, it was guilt, masked by possessive control. My heart ached not for Evander, but for the man he had pretended to mourn, and for the child I was carrying, the heir to a cold-blooded throne. Just as Caius reached the final, damning log, a blinding, sudden light erupted from the entrance of the bay, accompanied by the shriek of tires on gravel. Freeze! Thorne security. No one moves. We were compromised. Evander's men had found us. 5 hulking security guards in black tactical gear stormed the bay, led not by Dorian, but by Evander Thorne himself. He stood in the entrance, perfectly composed, yet radiating a terrifying, focused fury. You chose the wrong side, Caius, Evander said, his voice deadly calm, echoing through the vast space. He didn't look at his brother, only at me. And you, Jamie. You chose to violate the contract and steal my property. You have sealed your fate and the fate of your pathetic family. Caius instantly stepped in front of me, shielding me from the guards. You won't touch him, Evander. We have the drive. We know about Dorian. You're finished. Evander merely smiled, a cold, horrifying flash of triumph. Did you really think I wouldn't track the second most important person in my life? I let you run, Caius. I let you think you were winning. I knew you'd lead me to the evidence and the surrogate. He gestured to the laptop where the damning logs were still open. Too late. Lucien, that connection is running through an unprotected line. You're exposed. Suddenly, the screen on the laptop went black. System wipe in progress. No! Caius roared, slamming his fist onto the table. The logs, the evidence, were being remotely destroyed. Dorian's back-end access, Evander explained, his voice chillingly arrogant. It's always on. Now, hand over the surrogate. My son will be born in the safety of my control. The 5 guards started advancing. Caius grabbed me, pulling me toward a shadowed corner, pushing me behind a massive steel boiler. Lucien was frantically trying to salvage the laptop, but it was useless. We need a distraction. Caius whispered fiercely, his alpha scent sharp with adrenaline and fear. Stay here, Jamie. Do not move. I'll buy you time to find a way out. He pulled a small, heavy piece of equipment, Marcus's old camera flash, from his jacket pocket and threw it across the bay. It detonated with a blinding flash, plunging the area into momentary darkness and disarray. Caius used the chaos. He didn't run, He charged the nearest guards, a blur of righteous anger. He was fighting for his dead brother, and for the life I carried. I watched, horrified, as he was overwhelmed, for men tackling him to the concrete floor. Evander, however, ignored the fight. He walked straight through the fray, his eyes fixed only on the boiler where I was hiding. He didn't care about Caius, he cared only about his property. He rounded the corner, and we were face to face. "Game over, Jamie," Evander said, his voice laced with absolute finality. He reached for my arm, his grip cold and steel-like. "You belong to me. And so does the heir." I flinched, terrified. But then, my eyes fell on the heavy, metal crowbar tucked into a maintenance rack beside the boiler. The shame, the terror, the rage, it all boiled over. I was tired of being property. I was tired of being controlled. I was fighting for my life, for my family, and for Marcus's last hope. With a desperate cry of defiance, I snatched the crowbar and swung it wildly at Evander's hand, the one gripping my arm. Crack! The sound of metal hitting bone echoed sickeningly through the bay. Evander screamed, a raw, inhuman sound that was a million miles away from his usual composed voice. He recoiled, clutching his now broken hand, his face contorted in disbelief and pain. I didn't wait. I scrambled out from behind the boiler and ran, heading for a small maintenance tunnel I'd spotted earlier. But before I could reach it, a blinding pain, a sudden, sharp contraction, ripped through my abdomen. I gasped, stumbling to my knees on the cold, unforgiving concrete. I looked down. A small, dark stain began to spread across the silk of my pajamas. The shock of the injury, the terror of the chase, the physical strain, it was too much. I looked up and saw Evander, his face a mask of primal, destructive rage, his body trembling, advancing on me. "My son," he screamed, the sound of a man losing everything. He didn't need to touch me. The pain was crippling. I collapsed onto the cold concrete, my vision swimming. The last thing I heard before the world dissolved into a cacophony of sirens, shouting, and pain, was Caius's frantic voice roaring my name, followed by the terrifying, familiar sight of Evander's perfect black shoe stopping directly beside my head.
And with that heart-stopping moment, we have to pause the story of the surrogate scandal. I know, that was a long one, and we just dropped a massive cliffhanger on you. I hope the intensity of Jamie's escape, Caius's loyalty, and Evander's betrayal kept you absolutely hooked from beginning to end. You saw how we left Jamie, exposed, fighting for his life, and potentially losing the heir right when he finally found the courage to fight back. The good news: the story is far from over. I am already deep into drafting Chapter 7 and the explosive finale where we uncover who truly ordered the hit on Marcus and watch Evander's empire crumble. If you love this story, the dramatic pacing, and the intense emotional stakes, do us a huge favor. Hit the like button and make sure you subscribe to Boy Love Ballads. Promise, I'll drop the sequel, Chapter 7, the final choice, in just a day or two. Turn on those notifications so you don't miss the moment we reveal what happened to Jamie and the baby. Thank you so much for sticking with the full story. We'll see you in the next chapter.